The Galactic Confederation gathered in emergency session aboard the massive station that orbited the neutral world of Terrace. Representatives of 12 species filled the grand chamber, their voices a mix of different tones and languages as translation devices worked overtime. Fear hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Commander Vix stood at the center of the chamber, his blue scales reflecting the dim light. The latest holoprojection played behind him, showing the destruction of the colony world Nelpha. Everyone watched in silence as the dark ships of the Void Fleet methodically reduced cities to ash. The recording ended with static as the observation post itself was destroyed. "That makes 3 worlds in the past 60 days, Vix said, his voice steady despite the weight of the news. "Our combined fleets cannot hold them back. Our shields fail against their weapons. Our scientists cannot decode their technology fast enough." The representatives murmured among themselves. Some prayed. Others argued in hushed tones. All knew what this meant. The Confederation, which had maintained peace for over 2,000 years, faced extinction. Elder Moore of the Linturi rose on spindly legs. "What of the defensive line at Proxima Station?" "It will delay them." "Nothing more," Vix replied. "Then we are finished," said Representative Tull, a massive being whose rocky skin cracked with each movement. "Perhaps surrender." "There have been no responses to communication attempts," Vix cut in. "They destroy without demands or mercy." The chamber erupted in voices. Some called for mass evacuation to the outer rim. Others insisted on fighting to the last ship. A few simply wept. The pride of 12 advanced civilizations crumbled in the face of inevitable defeat. Ambassador Lorne watched from his seat, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Unlike the others, he remained calm, thinking. When he finally stood, the chamber quieted. Lorne rarely spoke, but when he did, all listened. "There is one option we have not considered," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander Vix tilted his head. "Speak, Ambassador." Lorne looked around the chamber, making eye contact with each representative. "We could contact the humans." The silence that followed was deeper than before. Then came the outburst. "Madness. The Chaos Bringers. They are savages." Vix raised a hand for quiet. "The humans were deemed too dangerous for inclusion in the Confederation 3 centuries ago. Their unpredictability might be exactly what we need." Lorne finished. "Everything we've tried has failed because we think in patterns the Void Fleet can predict. Humans do not." Elder Moore shook his head. "You weren't there during the Orion incident. I saw what a single human ship did to our fleet when they felt threatened." "Precisely," Lorne said. "They destroyed 7 of our most advanced vessels with a mining ship. Imagine what they could do with proper warships against our common enemy." The debate raged for hours. Recordings of past human encounters were reviewed. The destruction they had caused. The impossible solutions they had created. Their alarming capacity for both savage violence and unexpected compassion. "They have kept to their solar system since we rejected them," Tull noted. "Why would they help us now?" "Because despite everything, humans love a challenge," Lorne replied. "And they cannot resist helping those in need, even those who once rejected them." In the end, the vote passed by a narrow margin. The Confederation would break its own oldest rule. They would ask for help from the species they had deemed too dangerous to join their peaceful society. Commander Vix approached Lorne after the session ended. "The Council has selected you to make contact with Earth." Lorne's ship emerged from the jump point at the edge of the Sol system. The small diplomatic vessel shuddered as it decelerated, its systems struggling after the long journey. Through the viewport, the blue-green third planet hung against the blackness of space, surrounded by a web of satellites, stations, and defense platforms. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted space. Power down and prepare for inspection." The human voice came through harsh and clear on the comm system. Lorne adjusted his translation device and responded. "This is Ambassador Lorne of the Galactic Confederation. I come seeking audience with Earth's leadership on a matter of utmost urgency." A long pause followed. Lorne waited patiently, knowing the humans were likely scanning his ship, verifying his identity, and probably arguing among themselves about how to respond. Humans always argued before making decisions, a trait that both fascinated and frustrated the more consensus-minded species of the Confederation. Confederation ship, maintain position. Escort incoming. Within minutes, 2 human military vessels approached. They were angular, with none of the elegant curves of Confederation ships. Everything about human design screamed functionality over form. Weapon systems plainly visible, engines unnecessarily large. Even their diplomatic greeting was a thinly veiled threat. A new voice came through the comm. "Ambassador, this is Captain Tanner of Earth Defense. We haven't had Confederation visitors in nearly 50 years. Must be important." The captain's tone carried an edge of sarcasm that the translation device couldn't quite filter out. Lorne understood. The last official contact between humans and the Confederation had been the formal rejection of Earth's application to join. "Captain, I would not be here if the situation were not dire. The Confederation faces extinction. I am authorized to request Earth's assistance." Another pause. Lorne imagined the captain conferring with his superiors. "You're cleared to dock at Lunar Base Alpha. Follow our lead exactly. Any deviation will be considered hostile." The journey to the moon took several hours. Captain Tanner's ships flanked Lorne's vessel the entire way, their weapons systems locked and tracking. Through the viewport, Lorne observed the sprawling human civilization, orbital habitats, massive solar collection arrays, shipyards building vessels of all sizes. In 3 centuries of isolation, humanity had been busy. Lunar Base Alpha loomed ahead, a vast complex built into and beneath the lunar surface. Only the landing pads and defense turrets were visible from above. Lorne's ship settled onto the designated platform with a gentle thud. "Atmospheric equalization complete. You may disembark, Ambassador. A security team will escort you." The airlock cycled open, and Lorne stepped onto human territory. The gravity felt slightly wrong, adjusted to Earth normal rather than the Confederation standard. The air carried unfamiliar scents. 4 humans in military uniforms waited, their hands resting on sidearms. A tall, weathered human stepped forward. "Ambassador Lorne. Captain Tanner, welcome to Luna." Up close, humans were even more unsettling. Their eyes, just 2 of them, stared with an intensity that made Lorne's scales tighten. They moved with quick, unpredictable motions. Even at rest, they seemed poised to explode into action. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your escort." "Don't thank me yet. The Council isn't exactly thrilled about your arrival." "This way." They walked through stark corridors carved from lunar rock. Other humans stopped to stare as they passed. Some looked curious, others openly hostile. Lorne had studied human history extensively. He knew the rejection from the Confederation had been a deep wound to their pride. The meeting chamber was a simple room with a round table. 5 humans waited, 3 in military dress, 2 in civilian clothing. Their faces gave away nothing as Lorne entered. "Ambassador," said an older human with silver hair, "I am Director Wells of Earth's United Defense Council. You have 30 minutes to explain why we should care about the Confederation's problems." Lorne placed a data crystal on the table. It projected the same images he had shown the Confederation Council: the destruction of Nelpha, the advancing Void Fleet, the failed defense attempts. The Void Fleet appeared 6 months ago from beyond the galactic rim. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply destroy. 3 Confederation worlds are gone. Billions dead. The humans watched the footage in silence. Their expressions hardened, but showed no shock or horror. They had seen war before. "Our scientists cannot counter their technology. Our fleets cannot stop their advance. At current projections, they will reach Earth space in 14 months. Captain Tanner leaned forward. "So after centuries of keeping us at arm's length, Now you need our help." Earth's response stunned Lorne. Instead of the deliberation and careful planning he expected, the humans mobilized with alarming speed. Within 24 hours of his presentation, their defense council had not only agreed to help, but had begun assembling a fleet. "You're wasting valuable resources," Lorne said as he followed Director Wells through a massive shipyard orbiting Earth. Workers swarmed over vessels of all sizes, retrofitting civilian ships alongside military craft. These smaller ships cannot withstand even a glancing hit from void weapons. Wells smiled thinly. Not every ship needs to survive. Some just need to deliver their payload. The concept horrified Lorne. "You're sending your people on suicide missions. They're volunteers, Ambassador. And they understand the stakes." Wells gestured to a viewport showing Earth below. "That's everything we have. We don't have the luxury of holding back." They entered a cavernous engineering bay, where a team worked around a partially disassembled Confederation shuttle, the one Lorne had arrived in. At the center of the chaos stood a human with wild hair and grease-stained clothes, shouting orders and scribbling diagrams on any available surface. "Ambassador, meet Jack," Wells said. "Our best problem solver." Jack looked up, eyes bright with manic energy. "So you're the alien who brought us a proper challenge. Perfect timing. I need you to explain how your shield harmonics work, because they're all wrong for dealing with the void energy signatures." Lorne blinked in confusion. "Our shields are the most advanced in known space." "Yeah, and they still fail," Jack interrupted, pulling Lorne toward a workstation. "See, you're trying to create perfect energy distribution, but that's exactly why they cut through you like butter. The void weapons are designed to find and exploit patterns." Jack pulled up schematics of the void weapons based on Confederation data. "Look here. Their energy pulses adjust to match shield frequencies. But what if the shields had no pattern to match? What if they were deliberately chaotic?" Lorne watched in growing astonishment as Jack explained his theory. The human proposed making shields that randomly shifted frequencies, deliberately introduced interference patterns, and occasionally failed in controlled areas to confuse targeting systems. "That violates every principle of energy shield design," Lorne protested. "Exactly," Jack grinned. "That's why it'll work." In another section of the shipyard, Lorne observed humans retrofitting kinetic weapons, missiles, railguns, even what appeared to be mining explosives, onto their ships. "The void defenses are calibrated against energy weapons," explained Captain Tanner as they walked. "Sometimes the oldest solutions work best. Projectile weapons. The Confederation abandoned those millennia ago." "That's probably why you're losing," Tanner said bluntly. By the fifth day, representatives from the Confederation arrived to coordinate with Earth. They watched in horror as humans tested their modifications on a derelict Confederation cruiser. Jack's chaotic shields failed spectacularly, then unexpectedly held against a sustained barrage. "It can't work," insisted Commander Vix, who had joined the delegation. "There's no consistency, no reliability." "That's the point," Jack said, not bothering to look up from his console. "The void can't predict what we can't predict ourselves." The Confederation representatives grew increasingly disturbed as they observed human military protocols. Where the Confederation relied on precise calculations and careful planning, humans embraced randomness. Their battle plans included multiple contradictory scenarios. Their chain of command allowed for field improvisation. "This isn't war," Vix complained to Lorne. "This is madness." "Perhaps madness is what we need," Lorne replied quietly. On the 10th day, the Earth fleet was deemed ready. 47 vessels of varying sizes and capabilities, crewed by volunteers who understood they might never return. The Confederation had contributed technical specialists to each ship and 3 of their own cruisers. Before departure, Director Wells addressed the assembled crews. His speech was brief and direct. Nothing like the elegant, lengthy orations Confederation leaders would deliver. "You know what's at stake. You know the odds. Fight smart. Fight dirty. Come home if you can. As the fleet prepared to depart, Lorne stood on the bridge of the command ship beside Captain Tanner. The humans seemed unnaturally calm, considering the suicide mission they were embarking on. The journey to the front lines would take 7 days at maximum speed. Lorne spent much of his time observing the humans as they continued to modify their equipment. Even in transit, they wouldn't stop tinkering, adjusting, improving. They slept little, worked in shifts, and consumed alarming amounts of stimulants they called coffee. Captain Tanner invited Lorne to join the daily tactical meetings on the command ship, which they had named Defiance. The name itself spoke volumes about human psychology. "We analyzed the Void Fleet's attack patterns," Tanner explained to the assembled officers, pointing to a holographic display. "They always follow up successful tactics with the same approach. They're learning, but they're learning like machines, systematic, predictable. That is why they have been so effective against us," Lorne admitted. "The Confederation responds with established countermeasures. We follow protocols developed over centuries." Jack, who had somehow become the de facto head of engineering despite his lack of formal rank, snorted. "You've been playing chess while thinking 5 moves ahead, but they've memorized the entire game book. You need to flip the board." The human approach to warfare fascinated and terrified Lorne. They discussed sacrificing ships as decoys, using civilian vessels as traps, and tactics that violated every principle of honorable combat in the Confederation handbook. On the 4th day, alarm klaxons blared throughout the fleet. The Void Scout vessel had appeared at the edge of their sensor range. "All ships, battle stations," Tanner ordered calmly. "Looks like we get to test our modifications early." The Confederation officers aboard began the standard preparation sequences, but Tanner overrode them. "No standard formations. Execute Scatter Plan Delta." The human ships broke in seemingly random directions while the 3 Confederation cruisers maintained position, confused by the chaotic movement. "What are you doing?" Commander Vix demanded from the Lid Confederation vessel. "Form a defensive perimeter." "Negative," Tanner replied. "That's exactly what they expect. Maintain calm silence and prepare to execute on my mark." The Void Scout approached cautiously. It was smaller than the main fleet ships Lorne had seen in recordings, but still deadly. Its black hull absorbed light rather than reflected it, making it seem like a hole in space. "It's scanning us," reported the sensor officer, getting a lock on the Confederation cruisers. "Of course it is," Tanner muttered. "They're the only ones following a predictable pattern." "All ships, execute Firefly maneuver in 3, 2, 1. The human vessels suddenly cut power to all major systems, appearing to drift dead in space. Only minimal life support remained active. The Void vessel paused its approach, apparently confused by the sudden disappearance of energy signatures. "What's happening?" Lorne whispered, standing tense beside Tanner's command chair. "We're becoming ghosts," Tanner replied. "Their targeting systems lock onto energy patterns, so we're giving them nothing to lock onto." The Void Scout approached one of the seemingly dead human ships, extending what appeared to be scanning appendages. "Now," Tanner ordered. Every human ship simultaneously restored power, but not to their main systems. Instead, they activated Jack's modified shield generators, which pulsed with erratic energy that caused the Void Scout's sensors to overload. Before it could recover, a barrage of primitive kinetic projectiles, simple metal slugs accelerated to tremendous speeds, tore through its hull. The Void ship attempted to retreat, but found itself surrounded by human vessels that had drifted into a loose sphere during their powered-down state. A final volley from multiple directions shredded the Scout into fragments. "Confirm destruction," Tanner ordered, "and scan for any transmission bursts it might have sent." The bridge crew worked efficiently, their earlier joking manner replaced by professional focus. Lorne noticed that despite their victory, none of the humans celebrated. "It got a partial transmission out," reported the communications officer. "Encrypted, but definitely aimed toward the main Void fleet." Tanner nodded as if expecting this. "Then our timetable just accelerated. They know we're coming now, and they've seen a glimpse of our tactics. Will that compromise our plans? Lorne asked. No, Jack said, entering the bridge with grease still on his hands. It'll make them adapt to counter what they just saw, which is exactly what we want. You wanted them to see our tactics. Lorne was confused. Tanner and Jack exchanged glances. We wanted them to see some of our tactics, Tanner explained. The ones we don't plan to use again. Lorne finally began to understand the human approach to warfare. It wasn't just chaos. It was calculated unpredictability. They sacrificed perfect efficiency for the advantage of surprise. Proxima Station hung in space like a wounded giant. The massive Confederation defense platform had clearly seen heavy fighting. Entire sections were dark, and debris fields surrounded it. The remaining Confederation fleet, 27 ships of various classes, maintained a defensive formation around the station. They've been hit hard, Tanner observed, studying the sensor readings. But they're still holding the line. Commander Vix established communication with the station as soon as they arrived. The station commander, a tall insectoid being named Krill, appeared on screen. His compound eyes widened at the sight of humans on the bridge. You actually convinced them to come, Krill said to Vix, not bothering to hide his surprise. Though I see only a small fleet, will this be enough? Quality over quantity, Commander, Tanner interjected. And we've brought some new ideas. Krill's mandibles clicked in what Lorne recognized as skepticism. The Void Fleet will return within 12 hours. Our latest intelligence suggests they've assembled their largest battle group yet, over 50 capital ships. Then we better get to work, Jack said, already pulling up schematics of the station and remaining Confederation vessels. I need access to your shield generators and weapon systems. Krill bristled at the human's directness. Our technology is not to be. Your technology is failing against the void, Tanner cut in. Let us help, or we all die together. After a tense moment, Krill nodded. Very well. But I insist our engineers supervise any modifications. Perfect, Jack grinned. They can learn something new. The next 10 hours were a frenzy of activity. Human engineering teams spread throughout the Confederation fleet, implementing Jack's chaotic shield modifications and installing kinetic weapon systems. The Confederation engineers watched with growing alarm as humans bypassed safety protocols, rerouted power systems, and essentially rewrote centuries of established military doctrine. On Proxima Station, Tanner and Lorne joined Commander Vix and Krill in the Strategic Command Center. The holographic display showed their combined forces, the remaining Confederation ships now integrated with the human fleet in a scattered, seemingly random formation that made Krill visibly uncomfortable. This is madness, Krill insisted. There is no coherent defensive structure, no clear fallback positions. That's the point, Tanner explained patiently. The Void Fleet adapts to patterns, so we're giving them none. Our simulations show a 73% probability of total defeat with this approach, one of Krill's analysts reported. Your simulations are based on conventional tactics, Tanner replied. Nothing about our plan is conventional. Before they could argue further, the long-range sensors blared warnings. The Void Fleet had arrived early, much earlier than predicted. 53 black ships emerged from jump points, their hulls seeming to absorb the starlight around them. All ships, battle positions, Tanner ordered calmly. Execute Firefly Protocol. Just as they had practiced, the combined fleet cut power to their main systems, appearing to drift dead in space. The Confederation captains followed the orders reluctantly, their training screaming against such an unorthodox approach. They're scanning the station, reported a sensor officer. Ignoring our ships. They think we're debris, Tanner explained to a confused Krill. Just wreckage from the previous battles. The Void Fleet advanced in their standard formation, a perfect geometric pattern that allowed overlapping fields of fire. Their discipline was machine-like in its precision. Wait for it, Tanner said softly as the enemy fleet moved into optimal position. Wait. The lead void ships began powering up their main weapons, preparing to finish off Proxima Station. Now, all ships, execute Thunderclap. The combined fleet suddenly surged to life, but not in a coordinated attack. Instead, each vessel followed its own seemingly random course, some rushing toward the void ships, others performing wild evasive maneuvers. The chaotic shield systems flared into existence, creating a bewildering array of energy signatures. The void fleet hesitated, just for a moment. But that moment was enough. The human ships launched their primitive but devastating kinetic projectiles, while the modified Confederation vessels targeted the same points with their energy weapons. 3 void ships exploded in the initial assault. 2 more spun out of control, their navigation systems apparently confused by the unpredictable attack patterns. "It's working," Lorne whispered, hardly believing his eyes. The surviving ships regrouped at an abandoned mining outpost in a system with a dying red giant. The human vessels, built for speed and adaptability, had fared better than the Confederation cruisers. Of the combined fleet, 28 ships remained operational, though many had sustained heavy damage. The command crew gathered in a makeshift war room carved from the rocky asteroid that housed the outpost. Faces were grim, bodies exhausted. The loss of Proxima Station weighed heavily on everyone. "We hurt them," Tanner said, breaking the heavy silence. 17 of their ships destroyed or disabled. No one has managed that before. Yet they still adapt faster than we can. Commander Vix replied, his scales dull with fatigue. They absorbed our tactics and turned them against us. Even human unpredictability has limits. Jack sat in the corner, furiously working through calculations on multiple screens. He hadn't slept in 3 days, sustained only by stimulants and determination. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly. "The Void Fleet will reach the first core world in 9 days," Krill reported, one of his limbs bandaged from injuries sustained during evacuation. Billions of civilians with nowhere to go. The weight of failure pressed down on them all. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was Jack's fingers tapping against screens and the hum of life support systems. Lorne watched the humans closely. Throughout his studies of their species, one trait had always fascinated him: their strange relationship with hopeless situations. While most species became more cautious in the face of certain defeat, humans often did the opposite. "We need to target their command ship," Jack suddenly announced, looking up from his screens. All eyes turned to him. Their adaptation became more coordinated halfway through the battle, he continued, pulling up sensor logs. "See this energy signature? It's different from the other ships, and it remained stationary behind their front lines." Tanner leaned closer. "You think they have a central coordination point?" "They must," Jack said. "Their ships adapted simultaneously, not individually. That suggests either a hive mind or a command structure. Either way, there's a linchpin we can target." "Even if you're right," Vix argued, "their command ship would be the most heavily defended. We couldn't get within firing range." Jack's eyes had the feverish gleam of someone on the edge of either brilliance or madness. "We don't need to. I've been working on something, a disruption device that could sever their communication network." He called up schematics for a device that appeared cobbled together from various technologies. Part Confederation, part human, part salvaged void components from destroyed ships. "This makes no sense," Krill said, his compound eyes struggling to follow the illogical design. "These systems would interfere with each other." "Exactly," Jack smiled thinly. "It's designed to create a cascading resonance pattern that mimics their own command signals, but with deliberate errors that compound exponentially." "A virus," Tanner translated. "You're creating a communication virus." The Confederation representatives looked horrified. Such tactics violated every principle of their warfare doctrine. "It could work," Jack insisted. "But there's a catch. It has to be delivered from inside their command ship. The signal degradation is too great otherwise." The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. "A suicide mission," Tanner said quietly. Jack nodded. One ship, smallest we have. A skeleton crew. Manual delivery to their central processing node, whatever that looks like. Lorne looked around the room, expecting to see resignation, perhaps relief that someone else would be sacrificed. Instead, he saw the human officers exchanging glances, some nodding slightly, others making small gestures he couldn't interpret. "I'll take it in," Tanner said finally. "No," Vix protested. "You're needed to command the fleet." "There won't be a fleet if this fails," Tanner replied. "And I know the device better than anyone except Jack." "Then I'm going to," Jack said. "The device might need adjustments on site." "And me," Lorne heard himself say, surprising everyone, including himself. "I have studied void language patterns. I might be able to help navigate their systems." Vic stared at them as if they'd lost their minds. "This is absurd. The probability of success is virtually zero." The small human scout ship slipped through space, its systems running at minimal power. Tanner had named it Gambit, explaining to Lorne that it was a chess term for sacrificing a piece to gain advantage. The name seemed fitting. Inside, the three-person crew made final preparations. Jack cradled his device, a chaotic assembly of components that by all logic shouldn't work together. Lorne studied the latest scans of the Void command ship, while Tanner piloted them through the debris field that had once been Proxima Station. "Fleet is in position." Vix's voice came through the secured channel. "Beginning diversionary attack in 3 minutes." "Acknowledged," Tanner replied. "Radio silence from here on." As the channel closed, the three looked at each other. None needed to speak about the odds of their survival. In the distance, flashes of light announced the beginning of the battle. The remaining Confederation and human vessels launched a frontal assault on the Void fleet, a suicidal attack designed solely to hold attention, while Gambit approached from behind, hidden among debris. "There it is," Tanner whispered, though no one could hear them in space. The Void command ship was massive, easily 3 times larger than any of its escorts. Unlike the other vessels, it didn't join the battle, remaining stationary as it coordinated the fleet's movements. "Still no sign they've detected us," Lorne reported, monitoring the sensor readouts. "Their attention is focused on the main attack." Tanner guided Gambit closer, using larger pieces of debris as cover. The ship's small size and minimal energy signature made it nearly invisible against the background of destruction. "Look at that," Jack pointed to an unusual formation on the command ship's hull. "Those structures are different from the other ships. They're communication arrays. And there, that looks like a maintenance access point." Tanner adjusted course. "That's our way in." They approached the access point, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid detection. The battle raged on the other side of the massive ship, providing cover for their approach. When they were merely 50 meters from the hull, Tanner activated the magnetic grapples. The scout ship shuddered as it locked onto the Void vessel. The hull of the enemy ship was unnaturally dark, seeming to absorb not just light but hope itself. "Suits on," Tanner ordered. "Remember, we have 15 minutes before the fleet is forced to retreat. After that, we're on our own." The three donned pressure suits and gathered at the airlock. Jack carried his device in a reinforced case, while Lorne brought tools for bypassing alien systems. Tanner checked his sidearm, a primitive but effective weapon that fired metal projectiles. "Once we're inside, we follow the power conduits to the central processing node," Jack reminded them. "Place the device, activate it, and get out before it triggers." "Simple," Tanner said with grim humor. The airlock cycled open, revealing the pitch-black surface of the Void ship. They pushed off, using tethers to guide themselves to the maintenance hatch Jack had identified. Up close, the alien technology was even more disturbing. Organic curves merged with geometric precision in ways that hurt the eye. Lorne accessed the control panel, his four-fingered hands moving carefully across the unfamiliar interface. His studies of Void communication patterns proved useful as he bypassed the security protocols. The hatch slid open with surprising ease. Too easy, Tanner muttered, but they had no choice but to proceed. They entered a dark corridor that pulsed with faint blue light. The interior was hot and humid, more like a living organism than a ship. Lorne felt a strange pressure against his mind, subtle but persistent. "Do you feel that?" he whispered. Jack nodded. "Some kind of psychic field. The suits provide partial shielding." They followed the power conduits deeper into the ship, encountering no crew or defensive systems. The absence of resistance was more unnerving than any guards would have been. "It's as if they don't expect anyone to be suicidal enough to board them," Tanner observed. The corridor opened into a vast chamber dominated by a structure that resembled both a computer core and a beating heart. Thick cables extended from it like arteries, pulsing with energy. The mental pressure increased tenfold here, pushing against their thoughts like an invisible tide. "That's it," Jack said, his voice tight with effort. "The central node." As they approached, the reason for the lack of guards became clear. The node was protected by an energy field that distorted space itself. Anyone attempting to pass through would be torn apart at the molecular level. "The device won't work through that barrier," Jack said, despair creeping into his voice. "We need direct contact." While Lorne analyzed the field, Tanner noticed movement at the edges of the chamber. Dark figures emerged from recesses in the walls, not solid like conventional beings, but shifting masses of shadow with vague humanoid forms. "We have company," he warned, raising his weapon. The shadow figures approached slowly, making no sound. Their presence intensified the mental pressure to an almost unbearable degree. "I found it," Lorne announced suddenly. "The field cycles every 6.2 seconds. There's a millisecond window where the harmonics align and create a potential passage point." "A millisecond isn't enough time," Jack said. "For a person, no," Lorne agreed. "But for the device, launched at precisely the right moment." Jack understood immediately. He began reconfiguring the device for remote detonation. Tanner fired at the approaching shadows. The primitive projectiles passed through them without effect, but the creatures recoiled nonetheless, as if the concept of violence itself was disturbing to them. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Tanner urged, backing toward his companions. Jack finished the modifications just as the shadow figures began to close in from all sides. "Ready," he announced. "But someone needs to throw it at exactly the right moment. The timing has to be perfect." "I'll do it," Lorne said, taking the device. His species had reflexes faster than humans, evolved for precision hunting on their homeworld. "The window comes in 3 seconds," he continued. "Then we run." Lorne focused entirely on the barrier, tracking its subtle shifts. When the millisecond window opened, he threw the device with perfect timing. It passed through the barrier just before the field reestablished itself, landing directly against the central node. "Now we run," Tanner shouted. They fled back the way they had come, the shadow figures pursuing in silent determination. The mental pressure built to a crushing intensity, and Lorne stumbled as his thoughts began to fragment. Tanner grabbed him, half carrying him down the corridor. "Stay with us, Ambassador." "Not much further." They reached the maintenance hatch just as the first tremors ran through the ship. Jack's device had activated, sending its chaotic signals through the Void Command Network. They pushed through the hatch and made for their ship, moving as fast as possible in zero gravity. Behind them, the massive command vessel began to convulse as conflicting orders cascaded through its systems. The magnetic grapples disengaged as they reached Gambit. Tanner threw himself into the pilot's seat and fired the engines, pushing them away from the dying behemoth. Through the viewport, they watched as the Void Command ship's coordinated movements broke down. Its weapons fired randomly, sometimes hitting its own escort vessels. The entire fleet seemed to lose cohesion, ships drifting into each other or powering down completely. "It's working," Jack whispered, his face pale with exhaustion. "The virus is spreading through their network." As they retreated to a safe distance, Vix's voice came through the comm. "Whatever you did, it's affecting their entire fleet." They're in disarray. The combined human and Confederation ships, battered but still fighting, pressed their advantage against the suddenly vulnerable enemy. One by one, the void vessels were disabled or destroyed. The command ship itself imploded in a silent flash of light that momentarily outshone the stars around it. When the light faded, nothing remained but scattered debris. For the first time in months, hope returned to the galaxy. 3 weeks later, representatives from Earth and the Confederation gathered on Terrace to discuss the future. The void threat had been eliminated, though questions remained about their origins and whether they might someday return. Lorne, now appointed as Earth's official liaison to the Confederation, stood with Tanner and Jack as the Council prepared to vote on humanity's membership. Strange, Lorne mused, that it took facing extinction for us to recognize what humanity truly offers. "And what's that?" Tanner asked. "Not just your technology or your fighting skills," Lorne replied, "but your willingness to defy logic when logic fails, your capacity to hope when hope seems irrational." The council chambers fell silent as the vote was tallied. Centuries of isolation were about to end. The galaxy would never be the same. It would be more chaotic, less predictable, but perhaps stronger for it. As the council announced their decision, unanimous acceptance of Earth into the Confederation, Lorne reflected on how far they had come. From desperation to victory, from bias to respect, from isolation to unity. Sometimes, when all hope seems lost, the wisest call is to those who never stop hoping.